Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca and I am the Prevention Coordinator here with the Women's and Children's Alliance, and today I am going to be doing an online presentation to you all about sexual assault, sexual violence, and consent. Thank you for joining us today. So before we get started going into our topic for today, I would like to put forward a couple of general agreements for the crowd today. So first, the topic we are going to be talking about today can be really tough and sensitive for some people. It can bring up some difficult emotions because we do know that this does affect a lot of people and perhaps even some people in the room. So I want to make sure that everyone can take care of themselves. Feel free to pause this presentation at any time, grab a drink of water, run to the bathroom. Please do not feel like you have to sit through this all in one sitting, because we want to make sure everyone feels comfortable and safe and in a supportive environment. Another general agreement that we do is confidentiality. So there will be a couple of times where I will ask you to pause this presentation and turn and talk to your neighbors or different people in the group that you're watching this with. So just practice confidentiality in not once you tell maybe your own story or a coworker, colleague, friend, etc. tells you their story, that story does not leave the room. And also practicing confidentiality in telling stories about your friends and family, because we're not sure who they have disclosed to. So if you're going to mention a story about someone else who is not you, please do not use their name or any other form of identifying information. So now that we have that general agreement done, and hopefully you all can agree to do that as well as me, we're going to talk about who we are as an organization and the services we provide, what we do on a day-to-day basis a little bit, and then we are going to be talking about sexual violence and what that can look like and really the nuances of what that term is. Then we will be going into consent, different components of consent, what that looks like, sounds like, etc. And lastly, we're going to talk about some tools that you all can do and participate in to build a safe and healthy community together. So this is really a roadmap of where we are headed through today. So, WCA, or the Women's and Children's Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization located in downtown Boise, about 2 blocks north of the Capitol building, and our mission is to provide safety, healing, and freedom from domestic abuse and sexual assault. And really, our day-to-day services that we provide go along with our mission. So we do a range of services, which we will talk about at the end of our presentation, but really our day-to-day programs are really to provide safety, healing, and freedom for anyone who's experienced those issues. Our vision is to foster a community where everyone can thrive in a safe and healthy relationship. And that's really why I'm here talking to you today. As prevention coordinator, I go into the community and talk to different people and educate them and raise awareness about these issues and give people different tools and skills that they can use to help change the culture to prevent these things from happening. So, what do we know about sexual abuse, sexual assault, and sexual violence? First, every 92 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. As of right now, I have been speaking to you for about 4 minutes for this presentation. So that would be about 2.5 people so far that I've been speaking while we've been doing this presentation have experienced a sexual assault. That is a lot. You think about that minute after minute, day after day, year after year. It really kind of highlights the prevalence of this issue in our community. Also nationally, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men have experienced some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. So let's take a minute right here and pause. We all probably know 3 women, and we all probably know 6 men. And I would be surprised if you haven't come in contact with that many people throughout your day today. So there's a chance that you've already come in contact with someone today who has experienced this, a form of sexual violence in their life. It is that pervasive. So it touches everyone, whether or not we are aware of it or not. I also would like to center this a little bit to Boise, Idaho, where the Women's and Children's Alliance is located. So in Idaho, there is a rape every 15.4 hours. So that's almost 2 rapes a day. And I want to extrapolate a little bit on this statistic. So this is a statistic from the Crime in Idaho report from the Idaho State Police in 2017. So this was only for the year 2017, and only for the Idaho State Police. So that is not counting reports that went to local police forces, and it is not counting the number of people who experience rape and choose not to report. So in 2017, there was almost 2 rapes a day, and we know that this number is vastly underreported and unrepresented for our state. So I would like to invite you to have a little bit of a discussion right now. So feel free to pause this video and talk amongst your coworkers, your community mates, whoever you may be viewing this video with, and talk about, what does the term sexual violence mean to you? What do you think of? Sexual violence is a deliberate sexual action used to make another person feel helpless, humiliated, and degraded, and in turn, make the perpetrator feel powerful. Once again, it is a deliberate sexual action to make the perpetrator feel powerful and the victim feel helpless and powerless. So it doesn't come down to physical attraction and some other myths that we will talk about later in the presentation. It comes down to power, the perpetrator wanting to feel power. And that's a theme that I really want you to try and keep in mind throughout the rest of the presentation. So this is a visual representation of the previous slide. So once again, the definition of sexual violence is a deliberate action used to make one person feel helpless and powerless and make the perpetrator feel powerful. And that can be a lot of different actions, such as those below the umbrella. So we have sexual assault, sexual harassment, child sexual abuse, sex trafficking, revenge pornography, public masturbation, intimate partner abuse, and more. It's important to highlight the "and more" here because we know that there are a lot of forms of sexual violence that are out there, and these are only just a few that we wanted to exemplify and that are more common. We will be talking about in depth over the next couple of slides the definitions of sexual assault and sexual harassment a little more. So sexual assault is any contact, sexual contact that is, where a person is forced, coerced, and manipulated into any unwanted sexual activity. So there are a lot of different types of sexual assault, and probably the one that jumps into everyone's head first is rape. And I want to give you the definition of rape right now because it is very specific and it is different than the definition of sexual assault. So the definition of rape is penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. And that comes from the FBI as a national one, and also matches with the Idaho state law definition of rape as well. So rape is a very specific type of sexual assault, but it is not the only type of sexual assault. You could also have attempted rape, where penetration is attempted but not achieved. You could have unwanted fondling or sexual touching, or forcing a victim to perform other sexual acts such as oral sex, or penetrating the perpetrator's body, or forcing them to penetrate the perpetrator's body. Another thing I want to highlight here about sexual assault is the word forced. In our society, we tend to think of force and sexual assault as physical force alone, and I want to dispel that myth. Force can refer to mental force. It can refer to other forms of coercion, manipulation, and guilt. Physical force does not have to be present for it to be sexual assault. And lastly, what I want to touch on this slide is that people of all different backgrounds are victimized. It touches almost every single one of us in areas of our lives. So people of all ages, economic classes, races, sexual orientations, gender identities, religions, etc. experience this. However, people who are from marginalized identities are victimized at higher rates. So I have a couple of statistics that are examples of such. So for example, Native Americans ages 12 years and older, so 12, still a child, experience about 6,000 sexual assaults per year, which is twice the rate of all other races. So although Native Americans make up a small percentage of the population when you break down by ethnic and racial groups, they experience twice the rate of sexual assaults compared to every other race. And similarly, about 22% of Black women report being raped, which is 1 in 5, and 41% experience sexual violence, which is just under half, which is at higher rates than some other races as well. So people who are of marginalized identities tend to experience sexual assault and victimization at higher rates. Moving on, we are going to cover sexual harassment now. So sexual harassment is unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature. And that can really be broken down into 3 different categories as listed. So first, unwanted sexual statements. This can be things such as catcalls on a street, dirty jokes directed at a victim, commenting on physical appearance or attributes, or displaying sexually explicit drawings, pictures, and videos for that person to view. Next, unwanted personal attention can be things such as unwanted letters, unwanted phone calls, unwanted texts, unwanted visits, and unwanted pressure for sexual favors or pressure for romantic or sexual intent. Lastly, we have unwanted sexual advances. So that can be unwanted touching, hugging, kissing, fondling, or touching oneself sexually in front of others without their consent. So none of the stuff that we are talking about here in this presentation fits nice and neatly into a box. This is a very complicated and complex issue, and these definitions can get very blurry very fast. So for example, with unwanted sexual advances, it is harassment when, let's say, a boss repeatedly touches an employee on the shoulder and maybe gives them shoulder rubs and makes that person uncomfortable, right? But that's just sexual harassment because that is not quite sexual assault. However, that can turn into a sexual assault if there is a form of force or coercion or manipulation into an explicit sexual act, if that makes sense. So, like much of other life, there is not a nice black and white definition of this, but there is a lot of gray area, which makes this very complicated to talk about. But it is important to know what the proper definitions are and how to identify different types of harassment versus assault. So we are going to change gears a little bit and talk about consent. I would invite you to also pause the video again and maybe pair up if you were in a large enough group and talk about what the word consent means to you. This most basic definition, consent is an agreement between 2 participants to engage in a sexual activity. And I really like this comic and this artist, Allie Kirkham. She does a set of comic strips around consent, about what non-consent would look like if taken into everyday situations, such as getting a tattoo. So you can read that if you want, and she has a lot of other really great ones if you Google her online. But really, consent should be the bare minimum that we try to achieve in every sexual activity that we participate in. Our current model of consent, however, is not that. Our current model for consent that is taught right now is that everything is okay until one person says no or stop. However, that should not be what we're trying to go for. We should be trying to achieve getting an active yes before the activity and then continuing. Consent should be the first thought, not the afterthought. We can also talk about consent in a non-sexual way. It can be something really helpful to practice across all areas of your life, and especially in terms of talking about boundaries when meeting new people. For example, I am a hugger. I love to hug people that I just meet, but I always try and ask, can I hug you, to that person before I go in for a hug, because I don't know what their boundaries are surrounding that. So I'd rather achieve that explicit consent prior rather than finding out later. So this video is a kindergarten classroom that teaches consent. And that's something I really want to show, kids who are learning how to practice consent early in their lives rather than later in life, and just about little things as far as greeting people. So in this video, you have the boy who is in white as the volunteer to be the classroom greeter, and every one of his classmates get to choose how they want to greet him at the start of every school day. So let's see this, please. So I think that is a really great video to show how to learn consent at a young age, while respecting the fact that everyone has individual boundaries that they may or may not feel comfortable crossing. So now we are going to go in and break down the components of consent. So if anyone watching this video likes French fries, this will be a very easy acronym for you to remember. I love French fries, so I was very excited when I found this acronym. So consent is easy as fries. And if you love fries, you love consent. So first, each letter represents a component of consent that you should have in order for it to be 100% completely consensual activity. It's more than just a yes. All of these components are necessary when trying to achieve consent with another person. So first we have F, which is freely given, meaning that a person should be able to say yes without feeling pressured, forced, or being afraid to say no. So in its most basic form, freely given is a non-forced yes. That's only one component, right? So that's the F. Next, we have R, which is reversible, meaning that anyone can change their mind about what they are interested in doing at any time. So if you and one other person are perhaps kissing and they decide that they don't want to kiss anymore, that has to be completely okay for consent to happen. So that's F and R. Next, we have the I, which is informed, meaning that you want to be as informed as possible about what actions are going to be taking place, whether or not there is going to be contraceptives used, your sexual, like your STI history, perhaps. Those are all things that are important to be open and honest about with a sexual partner. So, for example, if two people agree to use a condom to have sex, and then the one partner who is wearing the condom decides to take it off halfway through sex and doesn't tell the other person about that, that is not consent. That is actually something called stealthing, and that turns it into rape. Because that other person, the other participant in the sexual activity, didn't agree to have sex without a condom. They agreed to have it with a condom, and by choosing to remove it and not informing the other person, it makes it a non-consensual activity. Next, we have enthusiastic, which is pretty self-explanatory. You want people to be excited about whatever you are about to engage in, whether that is hand-holding, other to more explicit sexual activities. And lastly, we have specific. So this is slightly similar to informed, but it is more referring to that saying yes to one act doesn't mean you say yes to everything else that follows. So if you say yes to hand-holding with someone, that does not mean that that implies that you say yes to hugging or to kissing or to other things that follow. So one does not imply that the yes is okay throughout all. So consent should be re-asked for throughout every stage of whatever sexual activity that you are engaging in. So if you can remember all of these: freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. If you just remember fries, you can remember all the different components to achieve consent. However, there are some factors that make consent impossible. So, first, consent is impossible when someone is asleep or unconscious, which is pretty straightforward. They cannot make an informed decision about the acts that they are going to be doing. They cannot give a freely given verbal yes. Therefore, they cannot consent. A person cannot consent if they are coerced into giving that consent, which I think can be the hardest to spot, perhaps. So, for example, a person can be manipulated, guilted, or somehow or other coerced into giving a yes. So if a person asks to have sex with another person and asks 5, 6, 7 times, and all 7 of those times your answer is no, and then the 8th time the answer is yes for one reason or another, probably because of guilt and manipulation, that's not a consent. That's coercion. Because if your answer was no on the first time, why is it yes on the 8th time? So coercion, I think, can be one of the more difficult ones to spot, but it really comes down to being manipulated, guilted, or otherwise forced into giving a verbal yes that you wouldn't otherwise do. Next, consent is impossible when someone is threatened. So that's similar to coercion, but if someone is making a verbal threat to you, your family members, people you care about, your children, your pets, etc., if there is going to be a thing that is harmed as a result of you saying no, so you say yes, that is not consent either, because it's not freely given. There are strings attached to you saying yes. Next, we have consent is impossible when someone is under the influence of a substance, whether that is drugs or alcohol, mainly because that person cannot give an informed decision, cannot make an informed decision about whatever actions that they are going to participate in. And we see a lot of debate and dialogue around this happening on college campuses regarding the role of consent and the use of alcohol particularly. So, for example, you have two people who have been drinking at a party and they decide to go and engage in sexual activity, but if they are both under the influence of a substance, that should technically be considered mutual non-consent, because neither one of them can make an informed decision about their actions. However, what I will say with this one is that if one person deliberately gives alcohol to another person in order to make them be uninformed, that is also non-consent, and that is something that we see a lot of times on college campuses, as well as the use of alcohol as a way to achieve sexual activity. Next, we have consent is impossible when someone is under the legal age. So speaking for here specifically in Idaho, the legal age of consent is 16. So, however, there's a caveat there. So, well, first, let me back up. If you are under the age of 16, it is impossible to consent, and it is considered statutory rape. Between the ages of 16 and 18, however, Idaho has a 3-year rule, meaning that you can consent to someone who is within 3 years older than you. So, for example, if you were 16 and engaging in sexual activity with a 19-year-old, that is consensual. But the moment that 19-year-old turns 20, that technically under Idaho law is non-consensual. So it is really interesting how these laws vary from state to state, and I would encourage everyone who's watching this presentation to go and look up their own state laws regarding consent, because they vary depending on where you live in the states. So next we are going to watch a quick little video. Some of you may have seen this before, about how to achieve consent through the metaphor of drinking tea.
You're still struggling with consent. Just imagine instead of initiating consent, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? They go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. And you say, would you like a cup of tea? I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea or not. But be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no, thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea. Okay? They might say, yes, please. That's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying, because you've gone all the effort of making the tea. But they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they do. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle and put the tea in. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drinking. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. They said yes.
So now we are going to go over a couple of common myths and misconceptions regarding sexual assault and sexual violence and consent. The first myth we have up here is that dressing provocatively and or acting in a promiscuous manner provokes sexual assault. Why might that be a myth? So, it's a myth because provocative dress and promiscuous behavior are not invitations for unwanted sexual activity. It comes down to consent and getting that explicit consent to it, rather than assuming a person might want sexual activity based on how they are dressed or what they are saying. Next, our myth is that rape and sexual assault can be avoided if people avoided strangers at nighttime. Why might that be a myth? Feel free to talk about that. Pause this video and talk about these before continuing on with this presentation if you want to as well. So that's a myth because one, sexual assault and rape can occur at any given time, and sexual assault and rape aren't caused by strangers. In 8 out of 10 cases of rape, the victim knew the perpetrator. So it is not caused by some random person on the street who lurks and then attacks a vulnerable person. It is caused by someone who the victim usually knows and tends to cause harm to the victim. And this is really important to point out because we want to highlight who is doing the perpetrating by saying, okay, well, if it's someone that they know, it's not based on how they're dressed or what they're wearing or how they're acting or where they're located. It is based on the perpetrator wanting to feel powerful. So next, our next myth is that physical appearance makes it more or less likely for a person to be assaulted. And that's a myth because sexual assault is not based on physical attraction. It is based on making the perpetrator feel powerful. And it's also important to point out here that the media and the culture here in the United States really tries to highlight sexual assault that happens to people who are physically attractive. And that can be really damaging for some people who may not fit into that stereotype of what it looks like to be a victim, and might make it harder for them to come out with their truth and their story and talk to their friends and receive help because they feel like people might not believe them. And our last myth is that what people call sexual harassment is actually just trivial and harmless flirtation. And that is a myth because harassment has nothing to do with flirtation, but it is meant to degrade and harm the other person. It is very similar to the previous one in that harassment comes down to power and wants to make the perpetrator and the harasser feel powerful while degrading the victim and making the victim feel powerless. It has nothing to do with flirtation, but everything to do with power. So throughout watching this presentation, if you feel like that some of the things we've talked about here today have maybe happened to a friend or a family member, or even just as a tool to equip you in case a friend comes forward and discloses to you in the future, here are some ways how to support a friend or family member. First, tell them that you believe them. It is incredibly important to have survivors of sexual assault know that they are believed, especially when we live at a time where a lot of people aren't believed. It can be really validating for someone who's gone through something so traumatic to hear that a friend or family member believes them unconditionally. And just know that you don't have to have all the answers for them. You are not trained in how to handle sexual assault. You are not a medical professional nor a counselor, and neither am I doing this presentation. So you do not have to have all the answers for them to be a good support for them. You can just focus on them and saying, I am so sorry that happened to you. Or, I'm here for you and I support you, and let me know what I can do for you. So really support them by not having all the answers. So that leads me to the bullet point: listen to them and respect their decisions. When someone has that traumatic experience that they've gone through, once again, it can feel like that they don't have any agency to make their own decisions. So being there and listening to them, but not making their decisions for them, and respecting whatever decisions that they make, can be incredibly important in supporting a friend or family member. That leads me to my next point, is maintaining support even if their behavior is different than what you wish. It is human nature to want to protect the people that we love, especially when they've been hurt. But once again, the survivor knows their own circumstances and their own body and their own life better than you as an outside person ever could. So where we hear this a lot comes down to whether or not a person decides to get a forensic kit, which is also known as a rape kit, done to test really the evidence of their sexual assault or rape. And what I will say about forensic testing is that it is incredibly invasive, incredibly invasive, and usually takes on average about 4 hours to complete, and can be as re-traumatizing and traumatizing as the original sexual assault that occurred. So there's very valid reasons why someone might choose not to get a forensic test done, and it is your responsibility as a friend to support that decision. Same with reporting to the police or other authorities. Statistically, out of every 1,000 cases that are rape cases that are reported to the police, only 4 of them end up with convictions. So out of every 1,000 cases, only 4 end up with convictions. So that is also a very valid reason for someone not to want to report their assault to the police. So it is up to us as friends and family members to listen to them and support them, even if we don't necessarily agree with their decisions, because they know what's best for them at that moment in time. However, you can offer different resources to them. There's a bunch of resources that we could offer that we will go into in a little bit, but there is other agencies across the state of Idaho and really throughout the nation and online that you can get resources to, build up your toolbox in your toolkit to help someone. And you can always reach out to another agency like us if you do not live here in the Treasure Valley, but we try and provide as many tools as possible for people to support a friend or family member. And if you have experienced abuse or an assault, please know that there are places that you can go to get help. They're even here in the Treasure Valley, or if you live otherwise, there are many resources and people out there who want to help you heal. So first, I would like to say that if you are in immediate danger, please call 911. For here at the WCA, our emergency hotlines that we will talk about in just a moment are not emergency dispatch lines, meaning that we cannot get a police presence or a medical presence out to you if you are in immediate danger. So 911 is going to be the number you will want to call. But all of our services are completely free and confidential, and we try and encompass our mission by providing safety, healing, and freedom. So here is a list of our services that we provide. So first, we have 2 24-hour hotlines. One is for sexual assault and one is for domestic abuse. And you can call them and they will be answered by a trained client advocate who will answer questions for you. And you do not have to be a victim to call our hotlines. You can be a concerned friend or family member looking for resources as well. And our hotlines will not ask you your age, any identifying information, where you live, etc., anything that can be used. It's completely confidential, just to help in whatever situation that you are in. We also have a safe shelter, so that is for people who are fleeing domestic violence. and it is a 120-day shelter, and then we also have another 120-day transitional shelter for people who need to spend a little more time getting some more tools in their tool belt before they exit our shelter program, such as maybe finding housing and securing housing, etc. We also offer safety planning, which is a really cool service because it helps people stay safe if they are unable to leave an abusive relationship. So, for example, that can be knowing things like where all the exits in your house are, and knowing that if a fight looks like it's going to get physical between two people, that to stay out of the bathroom and the kitchen because they have the most hard surfaces and things that can be used as potential weapons. It can also be safety planning by, coming up with an exit plan for when you are ready to leave a relationship, or in strategies for when you have just left a relationship, because we know statistically that the 2 weeks after leaving an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for someone. So sitting down with a client advocate and coming up with a safety plan for every situation is a really great service on how to stay safe. We also offer court advocacy. So we have trained victim advocates down at the Ada County Courthouse who can help make legal referrals for people who need legal assistance. But we can also help people with protection orders and then give them emotional and physical support while they are in a civil proceeding in a courtroom, which can be really a secure feeling for someone who's gone through a very traumatizing experience. We also offer clinical services, so counseling for youth and adults, people of all ages, of all genders, and you can be in the community, and it could be a past trauma or it could be an ongoing trauma. That is a service we offer to everyone. We also have 2 support groups, one on Tuesday nights for sexual assault and sexual abuse, called Circle of Support. And then we also have a support group on Wednesday night called Wrap Group, which is for survivors of domestic abuse. So out of all of our services, the only ones that are not available to men are our safe shelter and our support groups. The safe shelter comes down to capacity. But if a man is in a physically dangerous situation, we do have partnerships with local hotels to provide him with a safe place until he can figure out an alternative housing situation. And for support groups, unfortunately, there is a lot more stigma around men experiencing abuse and assault. So there hasn't been enough numbers out in the community because there's so much stigma around men experiencing these things that we haven't had the numbers for yet. However, if we did get the numbers for a male-only support group, we would be more than happy to provide that service. We also offer case management, financial literacy classes, and life skills classes for people who are in our shelter program and some community clients as well, to really give them tools to thrive after leaving an abusive relationship. Because we do not want to have anyone that we help end up in a situation where their only options are living in their car and becoming homeless or going back to their abusers. We want to make sure we equip as many people as possible with all the tools and resources they need to thrive after leaving an abusive situation. So what can you do to help change this culture? So first, support all survivors by believing them. There's a lot of victim blaming that goes around. There's a lot of non-belief. And if someone discloses to you, just start by believing them, saying, I believe you. Because the more people we believe, the more people who are going to come forward with their own stories and feel more comfortable about sharing and empowering others to do so. Also, if you hear harmful language or victim blaming language, speak up when you hear that. Something I heard a lot when I was in college was that test raped me, which is extremely vulgar, rude, and can be re-traumatizing for someone who may have experienced that in the past. So just say something like, I'm not okay with that phrase, or I find that offensive, or I had a friend who went through that and it was really tough for that person. So just not even fostering an environment where that language can thrive, because silence can be, unfortunately, really passive and can say it's okay. So we want to make sure that by speaking up, we're speaking out against that type of victim blaming and harmful language. Also, we want to promote healthy relationships, boundaries, and positive communication skills. So really just trying to practice healthy relationships in our lives can be really awesome. And, supporting people, whether that's like a celebrity or someone else that you know who has a healthy relationship, and ask them how they do that, and then maybe trying to incorporate some of those skills into your own life. Because we just want to work to create a world where everyone knows that abuse is not okay and that it's never the victim's fault in any situation, ever. And one way to do that is to carry a shoe card. So we have a little resource called a shoe card, which is a little small, card that we can give out to community members that has our hotlines on it. It has warning signs of abuse, a basic safety plan, and local and national resources on it. And that's something you can take if you're worried about yourself. It is something that you can take to give as a resource to a friend or family member you're concerned about, or it can just be something that you carry around with yourself to give to someone if you see something out in the community that makes you a little bit hesitant or worried, if that makes sense. Our goal at the WCA is to make sure everyone in the Treasure Valley will have a shoe card, and then we can all look out for each other as neighbors, friends, and family members. And that is it for this presentation. Thank you for joining me. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions. We have up here our business line, our 2 hotlines, our website, and the email that you can direct any questions to. Once again, my name is Rebecca, and thank you so much for joining me today.